Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that we are finally here and I'm finally getting back to the podcast. If you are new here, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are someone who used to listen, thanks for tuning in again. And if you're just like a new follower here and you're curious, I'm so excited that you're here. Um, Getting back on the podcast feels like a really big accomplishment for me because most of you know I actually started this podcast about a year ago. And at the time, I had a full time job and I was very consumed by that. I used to do marketing for a cybersecurity company, which that was like a total, oh my gosh, total shit show. I hated working for the corporate world and there was a whole lot of sexual harassment stuff going on, but maybe I can share that in another podcast. But I was trying so desperately to just like focus on what was in front of me, which was my work. And I had so many other things going on that the podcast kind of just like fell to the wayside. And it really wasn't a moneymaker for me. So I had to deprioritize it, which made me really sad because I feel like it's such a good way to connect with my community and to just go deeper and like share more of who I am. And also to be able to bring like, I don't know, just really cool guests and awareness and just topics to like a mass audience of mine and be able to like share stuff with you. So I was super bummed I had to put it on pause, but it made sense for me at that time in my life. And if you didn't know, I ended up getting let go during COVID, which I feel like is a similar story that a lot of people have. So I got let go and it was for the better because I truly hated my job. I was making like decent money. It was obviously really nice to have like a consistent income coming in, but I was already at this point with social media where I was starting to get some brand deals and I was kind of starting to like make a decent side come or like income on my own. And I knew that I couldn't really go like fully into social media and have a full time job at the same time and be a single mom and like everything, in life. And so when I got let go from my job, I really struggled at first. I took it as like a breakup. I was super hurt. I like had to grieve it. I was so concerned. I was just like, what's next? I was so just scared. And I remember getting some advice at that time, and they were like, you were so over that job and you were so ready for something new and different that this is actually like a blessing in disguise and you just don't know and you can't feel it yet, but like you were meant to do more. And sometimes we get pushed out of positions when we're stuck and we don't leave those positions. I feel like God, the universe, whatever it is that you believe will ultimately push us out of that position because we're just meant for more. And I feel like that's where I was at. So I collected unemployment. I took a few months off, which was honestly the first time that I had ever, taken time off from work since I was like 16. So it was really nice for me. Obviously, you don't make a ton of money from unemployment, but I had a decent savings, so I wasn't too concerned. So I basically took the summer off. And then after that, I was like, okay, now like what's next? I really have to figure this out. I thought about going back into teaching. If you don't know, I have my master's degree and I actually taught at the college level at San Diego State University and like all of the colleges, a bunch of like community colleges in San Diego area. And I'm qualified to go back and do that. And I do have connections to go back and teach if I wanted to. And I really loved it. Like teaching, I was really passionate about because it's really similar to what I do now with social media, where there's a lot of connecting and growing and helping other people and inspiring people. And that was definitely my favorite part of the job was like my relationships with my students, which I still have and am connected with so many of them on social media now, which is so great. I have a lot of really awesome stories I could tell on the podcast about just teaching and students and my experiences with all that. But I didn't want to go back because I really just wasn't making enough money. It's unfortunate that like I had to decide what I was really passionate about, and I felt like I was really good. I felt like I was a really good teacher. And I got a lot of validation from my students that they loved my class, but it just was not serving me, and it wasn't serving my family, me and Adrian. And I just like wasn't able to have the life that I wanted to. When I was teaching, I was still on like food stamps. You know, it was that bad. Like I still qualified for food stamps and cash aid. It's been about, I think, 4 years since I've been off of like all governmental assistance. And, you know, I'm really proud to be where I am now, but it definitely took some time. But all that to say, I was so unsure of what to do. I considered going back to teaching just for the time being while I kind of like figured out social media stuff. And then I was like, you know what? I am going to go all in with social media. Like, I finally have the time and the opportunity to do it. Like, I know that I'm good at this. I know that I can build something, and I would rather be working for myself than working for someone else. So, what is ultimately holding me back? Literally nothing at this point. I had a pretty decent savings. I'm really proud of myself for that. That I could fall back on if things didn't work out. So I kind of just went all in with social media. And over the last year, my following has like more than doubled. It's been insane. I think over the last year, I went from like, I don't know, 65,000 followers to like 170 on Instagram. And it's been amazing and incredible. And it's taught me a lot about myself. It's taught me a lot about like content creation, social media, community. Um, just a lot, honestly. And it's been amazing. And so, yeah, it's full circle because I was able to create and build a community and like really decided to go all in and believe in myself. It is now my full-time job. And it's wild to say that I'm literally a content creator. I hate the word influencer because I feel like we are all influencers, but I get it. You know, when you have like a mass audience, you are ultimately influencing people, but I think we all influence people regardless of our reach. But yeah, it's been pretty crazy and pretty humbling and pretty cool. Um, but I will say, like, gaining more followers doesn't, I mean, sure, it's like given me a little bit of an ego boost. And I would say like it does give you like some validation, which again, I think is just validating your ego. Like, oh, people like me. Oh, people are tuning into my content. But what I've realized is like ultimately you're still going to struggle with the same shit that you struggled with before if you don't deal with it. And what I'm talking about is imposter syndrome. I felt like this would be the like best first episode to talk about coming back on the podcast because I have had so much imposter syndrome with restarting this podcast and getting everything together and feeling like I'm not worthy. I've got nothing valuable to say. Why would anyone listen to me? And it is so frustrating. You know, I shared a TikTok today about it and I shared all my stories about it today about just the frustrations of like deep down, I know that my voice matters and I know that I have a lot to offer. I know I do. But there's this like little voice that says, no, 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 you don't. Like, what the fuck? I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it comes from like my childhood and sometimes feeling like I wasn't ever heard or feeling like I didn't have the space to be myself or feeling, I don't know. I mean, I've definitely looked up the reasons where it comes from, and some people argue that like imposter syndrome has a lot to do with like self-confidence and self-worthiness. And then other people argue that that's just not the case because even people who are extremely successful and have made it really far even feel that way too. You know, a lot of celebrities or like authors or people who have millions of followers or, you know, public speakers say that they struggle with this. And I feel like I really started to notice my imposter syndrome when I started teaching at the college level. I think that that was the first time in my life where I was like, holy shit, someone trusts me in front of a classroom? Like, why? Like, who approved this? It was like this weird moment that I had where I was just like, this isn't even my life. Like I dealt with a little bit of like derealization where you kind of feel like you're outside of your body watching yourself and you're just like, this is not my life. Like what? Um and I definitely feel like that's when I started experiencing like some pretty severe anxiety too. Like around that time, I just like, and the funny thing is, confidence really helps because when I would walk into a classroom and I would be like, you got it, you got it, you got it. Like, I would have the best session. Me and my students would be laughing, everything would flow. But then those days where I would walk in just like overwhelmed with imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, like I don't feel equipped for this lesson, or I'm not in the best mood today. I'm probably not going to do a good job and I'm not worthy of this. And, just all of the thoughts that we tell ourselves. Then it would go not as great because I was in that like pattern and spiraling. So I wanted to talk about my experience with this because I know that this is something a lot of people feel. I know it's something a lot of people experience in all industries. It's not just social media or teaching or content creation. It's like every industry. I shared about it on my stories, and I had a handful of people tell me that they've experienced it as well. With coaching, with teaching, anything where you have a responsibility that you kind of feel like you don't deserve, which is so wild because we work so hard to get to the place that we're at. And then we can't just like accept it and like allow ourselves to recognize that we made it there and that was our doing. And like, that's an incredible thing. So I want to talk about, I actually looked this up for the podcast because I thought this would be really helpful. Okay, what is imposter syndrome? So this definition came from the Harvard Business Review, and it's basically the thinking that people have an exaggerated view of your abilities. So meaning that we assume other people have this exaggerated view of what we're capable of. Also, the fear of being exposed as a fraud and the continuous tendency to downplay our achievements. Very interesting. And then I also read online, it said imposters suffer from chronic self doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence. The doubt may override any feelings of success or internal proof of their competence, and they seem unable to internalize their accomplishments, however successful they are in their field. High achieving, highly successful people often also suffer imposter syndrome. So it doesn't necessarily equate with low self-esteem or a lack of self-confidence. They also wrote that recognizing it within ourselves often requires like paying attention to our thoughts. So it means that you're a really mindful person and you're like aware of your thoughts if you have imposter syndrome because you've recognized this like negative pattern that you have. And it also means that we need to offer compassion to ourselves and ultimately forgiveness. And it really helps to remember that other people struggle with this, which is why I wanted to share about it. But I also wanted to share some tips for getting through it. So I looked some of these up, and then I also just kind of want to like talk about my own experience with it. Okay, so I have 5 tips, and the first one is to acknowledge and challenge your negative thoughts, which I think this is so incredible. So here's my tip. So pay attention to your negative self-talk and your irrational and intrusive thoughts that contribute to your imposter syndrome. And here's an action, like a way to sort of combat this. You can write down self-critical thoughts as they arrive. And you can challenge them by asking yourself for the evidence to support that or contradicting these thoughts in your head as they're happening. This can really help you break the cycle of negative thinking. Okay, here's tip number 2, celebrating your achievements. So imposter syndrome can cause a lot of us to just like downplay our achievements, But here's an action tip. You can keep a journal of your achievements. They could be big or small. You can review those things, or you could even write out a list. Like, this is something that I thought of today because I had this like really negative thought about how I wasn't doing enough and how I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be this year. Just all of the crappy negative self-talk, right? And I was telling myself, you know what? I am going to write out a list of all of the accomplishments that I, finished this year, and even things that I didn't finish, but things that I'm working on and I've put a lot of energy and effort into that will get done. And I know that they'll get done because I trust myself. And looking at this list really made me realize, like, wow, things don't just happen in a day. They don't just happen in a month. They don't just happen in a year. If you're making progress towards something, that is something to be so proud of. When I hit 100,000 followers on Instagram, I really struggled with the idea of like even sharing a post because I was like, oh God, this is going to be so cringy if I share a post about hitting 100,000 followers. Like, no one fucking cares. Like, no one cares. And I was like, you know what? Okay, maybe I don't like the post with like the 100K balloons, or I don't know. Maybe it just felt like too common. Like, I've just seen it too much. So I was like, I'm just going to tone it down and bake a freaking cake. I'm going to bake a cake with me and my son in the kitchen. And we are going to enjoy this moment together because this actually impacts me and him and our family. And we need to celebrate this. And if you're single like me, like, I get it. It can feel really hard to celebrate yourself. And sometimes you just have to do it. Like, I went out to the store, I got my own stuff to make my own cake. I lit my own candles. I blew out my own candles. I shared a little post to like celebrate it because I thought it deserved a spot on my feed. And I just wanted to like share that I was so grateful. But I'm glad that I did that. You have to celebrate yourself, even if it feels funny. It is such a good way. And you'll all like to just acknowledge your success or your achievement, and you'll always be able to look back on it and you'll be really glad that you did. Okay, tip number 2. Tip number 2 is setting realistic goals. So I kind of screwed myself over with like literally deciding to start all of these projects at the same time. I shared that I was starting my podcast. I shared that I was going to be releasing like an online course for like influencing and social media, which, I kind of came from the mindset of like, why not share that I'm doing these things, that these things are in the works. But I kind of realized that by doing so, I put a lot of pressure on myself because then I had a lot of people asking like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited, which was great. I was able to see that there was interest in it. But then I think I just added a lot of pressure on myself because I knew I wasn't even close to finish with getting like set up for the podcast. And I also just like wasn't even close to done with my online course. And that is a massive project. I mean, my online course is one of the biggest projects I've ever done. I mean, I feel like writing my master's thesis was probably the biggest project I've ever done, but this, I would say, comes close to it. It's a huge job and I'm doing it all on my own. And I'm so proud of myself. And I know that when I finish this, I'm going to be so proud. But I kind of fucked myself over by sharing about it too soon. So I would just give the tip of, setting realistic goals with people and with yourself. Unrealistic expectations of yourself can really contribute to these feelings of inadequacy. And here's an action or like a tip that you can do to kind of combat this. If you break down your larger goals into like smaller achievable tasks, this has helped me a lot. And you celebrate those milestones along the way while you're setting those realistic expectations and acknowledging your progress. This can help so much with building your confidence and reducing those feelings of being an imposter. Okay, tip number 4 is seeking support and mentorship, and honestly, just talking to other people who are in your industry or your field or wherever it is. Like, I find that when I talk with people who are in my industry who are like content creators or aspiring content creators or influencers, or just honestly not even just content creation, but like one of my best friends, Derek, he's really trying to like build a business for himself. He's a coach and he's got a website, put together, and he has all these ideas, and it's like, we'll get together and we'll talk about like our frustrations with the process and what we're struggling with. And honestly, that makes me feel like I'm not alone. And it makes me realize that it's not me. Like, this is a common thing that anyone struggles with when they're really trying to find growth with whatever it is that they're doing. Growth is going to involve hard times, and it's going to involve, for a lot of people, maybe not everyone, but feeling like, you're inadequate or you're not enough. You're not like built for this job, or you're not capable. And that's just that negative self-talk, where when you really talk with other people, you'll realize that you are not alone in that. Okay, tip number 5 is just embracing a continuous learning attitude. Because I have found that imposter syndrome really thrives on the fear of being exposed, like being exposed for who I really am, or being exposed as someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, or being exposed as, fill in the blank. So here's a tip. When you adopt this growth mindset and you view challenges as an opportunity for learning, you embrace this mindset that values the process of improvement rather than fearing failure. This helps so much because every single successful person has experienced failure. I don't care who you are, you've experienced failure. And there's no way to get to where you're going if you don't give yourself that opportunity to see if you can get there. So those are my tips. And I just kind of want to tie that up with a little bow of saying that the only person that can get you to where you want to be is you. And the only person who can help you with that mindset of knowing that you're worth it, that you're capable, is you. And I feel like a lot of it is just getting out of that pattern of negative self-talk and really taking these like tips and tasks and using them to benefit you. So I really hope that that helps you. I've definitely been feeling, like I said, a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to the podcast, and I refuse to allow me to get in the way of myself. I won't let that happen. I know that I deserve more. I know that I'm capable of more, and I know that I'm worthy, and I know that I have a lot of value to bring. I just have to continue to lean into that and trust myself, and I really hope that you can do the same. Okay, so I wanted to transition over to just kind of like the podcast. I wanted to talk about the process of like getting it going again, and then also just like where it's headed. This will just be like a shorter episode as I'm just kind of, giving some updates and talking about the podcast. But basically, I think I had like 8 episodes before this, so I'm just excited to pick back up where I left off. I already talked about like why I took a break and all of that. But I knew I wanted to get back into podcasting, and I wanted to talk about like getting this whole room set up. So I've got video recording. I'm going to upload this to YouTube. So if you're listening, you probably won't see what I'm talking about. But if you're on YouTube, you could totally see this, what I'm talking about. I turned my ex-roommate's room into a podcast room. So basically what happened was my roommate was moving out, and I was just so tired of having roommates. I mean, I'm 30 years old. I've got a son. Every single time someone comes in, there's this huge, massive like adjustment period of a couple months of just getting comfortable with each other, and me getting comfortable with someone else being in the house, and them getting comfortable with feeling like it's their own place too, and then having to like build and form a relationship. And I haven't had all the most amazing roommates, if I'm being completely honest. I've had some pretty fucked up roommates, which I feel like I would love to talk about in another episode. I mean, love to talk about because I have some stories. Yeah, I've got some stories about roommates that I can totally do a whole other podcast on. But so my roommate moved out, and again, I'm 30, I'm a mom. The adjustment period of having someone else move into my house just was like, ugh, daunting. And my rent's pretty fucking expensive. So I was nervous, but again, I was like, I'm going to take a bet on myself. And I remember looking through, like scrolling through Pinterest, and I saw all these really cute podcast rooms, and they had these like velvet couches with the mics and like the neon sign. And I had this moment where I was like, holy shit, I could do that. I could totally do that. So I started looking stuff up. I found, if you're watching, you can see this gorgeous pink velvet couch that I got. I got it from Amazon for $300. Um, which I get like a monthly gift card to Amazon every month. So honestly, I get like a $200 Amazon gift card for being an Amazon influencer every month. So I only spent like $100 on this couch. And then the neon sign above me, I think it cost me like $160. So there was that. And then I bought like a really pretty standing mirror from Hobby Lobby. It looks just like the Anthropologie mirror. And I think that was like less than $100. So honestly, I spent like $300 on this room. I definitely spent probably about like a couple $100 on just like equipment, the mic, like just all that stuff. But I spent less than $500 and got this room together. And I think it's so cute. I love this room. It's like my cat's favorite room. And it's like such a fun little cozy hangout room. But I transformed the space into like a podcast studio / content creation room. And I'm so proud of it. I love it. This is the first time again that I'm recording for the podcast in here. So it just feels like this full circle moment of like, I can't believe I'm doing this. It feels so good. But yeah, so that's kind of how like this podcast room got put together, and I'm just so excited to get back into podcasting. Like I said, it's just such a deeper way to connect with you guys, and yeah, I'm just excited to see where it takes me. I wanted to talk about like some of the things that I want to talk about on here. So I want to touch on motherhood, ups and downs. I want to have Adrian on the podcast, just like some fun stuff, nothing serious. I don't want to like put him in a weird place to talk about anything uncomfortable. But I thought it'd be fun to have him on here and there, and he can chat about middle school and just stuff that's going on and whatever. But yeah, I want to talk about like motherhood ups and downs. I want to talk about dating, my, social media, entrepreneurship, finances, tips on health and wellness, and just being a single mom and a solo parent. Pretty much all that stuff. Like I want to talk about some of the stuff that I talk about on Instagram, but I want to talk about it here. I want to do a lot of storytelling. So I kind of want to like revisit shit from my past and maybe kind of explore that with you. Hi, Peaches. Hi, honey. Do you want to come get on my lap? She's so cute. And then as far as like podcasting and when I want to podcast and how often I'm going to, release an episode, originally I was like, okay, you got to do weekly, maybe even bi-weekly. And I realized when I was experiencing so much imposter syndrome, I realized it was because I put so much like pressure on myself to do things right and to be perfect and to like have the perfect setup. I mean, gosh, I like put together this whole room, and I think that caused a lot of pressure for me. And so I'm kind of going into it with a mindset of like, I want to enjoy this process. I want it to be fun. I know it's going to be part of like my work, but I want it to be enjoyable. And I think for me, that just means putting less pressure on myself. Very similar to like what we're talking about with imposter syndrome. Like I'm trying to have realistic expectations for the podcast. And I think once I get into a groove and get into a flow with everything, and I really nail things down and maybe even get some like extra help, I might end up being able to commit to once a week. So for now, I'm just excited to be on here. I'm just excited that this is going and that I push through all of those thoughts. And I hope that this inspires you too, to know that like, honestly, I feel like it doesn't matter how successful you are. Like imposter syndrome's always going to be there if you don't work through that negative self-talk. Like I had this when I started my master's program. I had this when I started teaching. I had this when I had 10K followers. I had it when I had, 60K followers, and I have it now at 170. And if I've realized that it's an internal thing and that you've really got to work through it, because the external stuff can change, right? Everything can change around you, and you could be climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. But if you don't work on the stuff on the inside, you're still going to be in that same place, having the same problems, which, gosh, I feel like that's true for so many things, including relationships, right? Which I am very excited. I want to talk about like dating and relationships on here too. So I'm very excited. Oh, I also want to do a lot of like Q&A and like what would you do, or have people like write in. If you have been following me for a while, I'm obsessed with Nick Vial, and I love the way that he formats his podcast. He does a lot of like calls in, like a lot of people who call in. He gives them relationship advice, which, it's so funny because I had that imposter syndrome moment of like, well, like no one would take advice from me. Like I'm a single mom, like, who cares? But I realized I'm like, wait a second, my relationship status has nothing to do with my capabilities on giving good advice. I feel like I give great advice. I have my master's degree in communication. I also have, when I was in my bachelor's program, I also got my mediation certificate to mediate, which is probably expired by now. But anyways, point is, I've got a history in some of this, and I do feel like I could offer some value to people. So I'm really excited about this, and I think I'm going to end this first podcast here. I feel like this was really good. I'm feeling really confident, and I'm so, so, so excited to just like dive deeper into so many topics and talk with so many incredible people on here. I want to do a lot of interviews. I'm also going to do a lot of solo podcasts. We're just going to do a whole bag. We're going to do a whole mix of things. So, thank you so much for tuning in to this first episode back. And I'm just so excited to connect with you guys further. Okay, love you, and I will chat with you later.